I'm a doctor." The room froze. Every head in the Southern Hope Private Hospital lobby turned toward the voice, a voice too soft to command attention but far too bold to ignore. Senator Richard Whitmore III, Southern aristocrat, third-generation legislator and man who'd sued 3 insurance companies and won, turned slowly toward the speaker. His grip tightened on his son's wheelchair handle. "You." His voice cracked like a whip across marble floors. "You think you can heal my son?" He looked her over once, top to bottom, like scanning a stain. A girl, maybe 14. Dark skin. Shoes too thin for December, hair tied in tiny, uneven braids. A beat-up canvas tote slung over one shoulder filled with yellowed books and tape-marked folders. She stood with shoulders back, chin high, in front of one of the most powerful men in Georgia, like she didn't notice the cameras, the men in suits, or the hospital security inching closer. She didn't flinch, didn't blink. "Yes, sir," she said. "I believe I can. Before I go any further, tell me this. What would you do if someone like Layla stood in front of you? Would you trust her? Or would you laugh her off just like everyone else did? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you're watching this, don't scroll past just yet, because what happened next? It wasn't just about medicine. It was about truth, and who we choose to believe when everything's on the line. Senator Whitmore took a step forward. "You're not even supposed to be in this building." His bodyguards moved to block her path, but she didn't step back. She didn't move at all. "I didn't break in," she said. "I entered through the rear kitchen bay. One of the nurses left the door open. You snuck in. I walked in." The receptionist gasped. A nurse whispered something behind her gloved hand. Someone pulled out a phone, but Layla didn't even look around. "I heard the doctors can't help Ethan anymore," she continued, "and that he hasn't walked since the fall." "I think I know what's wrong." Richard barked a bitter laugh. "You think you know Dr. Kingsley has 3 PhDs. We've flown in specialists from Johns Hopkins. The governor himself called in a team from Zurich. But you, a child off the street, have the answer." Layla tilted her head. "Do any of those doctors know about lateral sacral nerve desensitization through reflex retraining?" "No, you made that up. I didn't. My grandmother taught it to wounded veterans when the VA hospitals turned them away." "Your grandmother?" Richard scoffed. "What is she now, an angel? Or your imaginary mentor?" Layla's hand gripped the strap of her tote bag tighter. "She's dead," she said softly. "Died during the last flu wave. There weren't enough beds for people like her." That hit the air like a fist through stained glass. And for the first time, Ethan, the boy in the wheelchair, spoke up. "Dad." Richard leaned down. "She doesn't sound crazy. You're a child. You don't know what crazy is, but what if she's right?" "Enough." Richard waved a hand as if brushing off a fly. "Security, take her outside before she embarrasses herself any further." 2 guards stepped forward. But before they could touch her, Ethan stood up just a few inches, bracing himself on the wheelchair's frame. His legs buckled and he collapsed back down, but the room gasped. The boy was supposed to be completely immobile. Layla didn't react. She didn't smile, didn't cheer. She simply looked at him and whispered, "You felt it too, didn't you?" Ethan nodded. I did. Something tingled. In that single second, the power shifted. Not in favor of science or tradition or credentials, but in favor of hope. A black girl, unknown and uninvited, stood against a white man with power, wealth, and a full hospital behind him and made his son believe before anyone else would. So what now? Does Layla get a chance to prove herself? Or will the system crush her before she even reaches the treatment room? The hospital staff never really whispered. They didn't have to. Their silence spoke louder than words. Eyes darted across white hallways like searchlights, scanning Layla Freeman as though she carried a disease they couldn't diagnose. But she walked those halls anyway. One security guard trailed her like a shadow. The nurse at the front desk tightened her grip on the intercom mic. Dr. Kingsley, his face taut like old leather, stood beside Senator Whitmore, arms crossed like a gate that refused to open. "She doesn't belong here," he muttered, "and yet—" Richard's voice was low, shaken. "My son moved his toe. That hasn't happened in 6 months. She probably got lucky." Kingsley snapped. Reflex. Involuntary twitch. Nothing more. Richard didn't respond. He couldn't. Because deep down, buried beneath layers of pride and pedigree, something had cracked. Behind closed doors, Layla stood in Ethan's room, staring out the window as the boy shifted slightly in bed. His legs still wouldn't obey him, but he smiled now. Tentative, soft, like someone who'd remembered what sunlight felt like. "Do you ever get scared?" Ethan asked. Layla turned slowly, all the time. Even now, she hesitated, then nodded, especially now. "Then why'd you come?" She looked at him, really looked, and replied, "Because no one else would." While doctors debated theory, a child showed empathy. Layla wasn't there to prove she was smarter. She was there because she refused to walk away from someone hurting. Outside, Dr. Kingsley paced like a man trying to hold on to a sinking ship. "Senator, I can't allow this to continue. If word gets out that we let some stray into our treatment wing—" "She's not just any stray," Richard snapped. "She's the girl who made my son move." Kingsley's eyes narrowed. "And what happens when she fails next time? Or worse, when she makes it worse? Who'll take the blame? Then, you, the hospital board, your re-election team." Richard didn't answer. Because the truth was, he wasn't sure what scared him more, the chance that she might be wrong, or the terrifying, undeniable flicker that she might be right. That night, Layla sat alone in the staff locker room. A nurse, one of the few who hadn't sneered, had slipped her a sandwich. She hadn't eaten it yet. Her stomach twisted too tightly to let hunger in. She took out her grandmother's journal. Pages worn corners, frayed ink, fading like a memory whispered too many times. "Peripheral disconnect begins with fear," the first line read, "not just in the legs, in the mind." Layla traced the words like they were a prayer. She had memorized them years ago, but tonight she needed them fresh raw. Because she wasn't just fighting for Ethan. She was fighting the walls, the stairs, the polished plaques, the unstated rules. She was fighting a system that only listens to the people it already trusts. Back in Ethan's room, Richard stood over his sleeping son. He watched the boy breathe slow and steady and remembered the night of the accident. The sound of bones against wood. The limpness. The doctor's tone when he said we'll try our best, like it meant we don't believe in miracles anymore. Richard had blamed the horse, the helmet, the weather, but the truth, he had blamed himself. For a brief, fragile moment, Layla and Richard shared something neither had words for: the agony of watching someone you love disappear from themselves. Morning came too quickly. Dr. Kingsley filed an official objection to Layla's presence. The board scheduled an emergency meeting. Lawyers whispered about liability. A reporter from the Herald had gotten wind of something unusual happening in the pediatric neurology wing. And yet, none of it mattered to Ethan. Because when Layla walked back in, his face lit up like it hadn't in months. "You came back," he said. "I told you I would." And she did, with no degree, no badge, no welcome, only belief. But belief doesn't pay insurance claims, and by the end of the day, Layla would face something far colder than doubt. She would face the hospital's full attempt to shut her down. Will they succeed, or will Ethan's second miracle prove too visible to silence? Layla wasn't supposed to be in the building. She didn't have a badge, didn't have credentials, didn't even have a last name that echoed in the ears of alumni donors. But there she was again, standing next to Ethan's bed while the sunlight streamed in through the half-drawn blinds, watching his knees twitch beneath the sheets. Ethan grinned every time he felt something. Sometimes it was a jolt, sometimes it was a tingle. Once it was just the strange warmth in his left foot. But whatever it was something. And something after 6 months of nothing felt like a miracle you could hold in your hands. Layla didn't smile often, but that morning she did. Not for herself, for him. For a boy whose world had been frozen in place since the day he fell. a boy whose family had every doctor in the region. And yet somehow he'd waited for her. But outside that hospital room the walls were shifting. In the boardroom on the 15th floor, a crisis meeting had been called. Not for a viral outbreak. Not for a malpractice lawsuit. For a 14-year-old girl from the South Side with a tote bag full of second-hand anatomy books and a confidence they couldn't quantify. "This is outrageous," said Dr. Kingsley, slapping a file down on the polished table. "We are one of the top-ranked neurological hospitals in the country. If word gets out that we allowed a minor, an unlicensed minor, to treat a patient, especially the son of a sitting senator." She didn't treat him, a board member corrected. Technically. She observed. She touched him. Kingsley hissed. She performed some folk nonsense she learned from a dead woman, and now the media is sniffing around like we're running an orphan clinic. Richard Whitmore sat silently in his chair, hands folded. He hadn't spoken much since Ethan's first movement. He'd watched his son's eyes light up again, watched his fingers grip Layla's hand like it was the only stable thing in the world. He didn't believe in magic. He believed in order, control. But that girl, she had brought something back into Ethan that no amount of money had been able to, and that was not something he could easily explain away. "She's not just some folk remedy," Richard said, finely voice-measured. "She's smart. Damn smart. Smarter than she has any right to be." Kingsley's eyes widened. "You can't possibly mean to endorse this. Do you realize the precedent? I realize my son is recovering, and she's the only variable we haven't already tried. You'll burn this institution down to protect a street girl." Richard looked up. "No, but I'll burn it down to protect my son's future." That sentence echoed like a warning shot. The room fell quiet. Downstairs, Layla sat beside Ethan and checked his reflexes again. She didn't use fancy tools. She used a broken tongue depressor and the heel of her palm. Her techniques looked foreign, almost primitive, but her movements were intentional, calculated, rooted in something deeper than textbook logic, something born of necessity, of desperation, of survival. She looked up and caught Ethan watching her. What she asked. "You look tired. I'm used to it. You don't have to do this." She paused. That one hit differently. "I know," she said, "but if I don't, they'll make you believe you can't heal, and that would hurt more." At that exact moment, the door opened. Two men in suits entered legal counsel. Layla recognized the look in their eyes. It was the same look a landlord gave her mom the day they were evicted. Cold, calculated, final. "Ms. Freeman," one of them said, adjusting his tie, "we've been instructed to ask you to leave the premises immediately, for liability reasons." Ethan jolted upright. "No." "You can't." "I'm afraid we can," the man replied. "And we must." Layla stood up slowly. Her hands didn't tremble. Her voice didn't break. "May I say goodbye?" she asked, briefly. She turned to Ethan, knelt beside him, and whispered something only he could hear. His eyes welled. He tried to hold her hand, but she slipped it away gently like smoke through fingers. Then she turned and walked out. No protest, no fight, no drama, because deep down she knew something they didn't. She had already planted something no one could uproot. And as the door closed behind her, Ethan's right leg lifted half an inch off the mattress, just enough for the nurse in the corner to drop her clipboard. It was too late to stop the storm. And what came next? That would shake more than just a hospital. It would shake a city. It took only 12 hours. 12 hours for Layla Freeman's quiet exit to ripple through the walls of Southern Hope like thunder in a glass cathedral. No press release, no official statement. Just a blank space in Ethan Whitmore's room the next morning, and the trembling voice of a boy who asked one simple question no one dared to answer. "Where is she?" Dr. Kingsley brushed it off. Said she'd violated safety protocol. Said she was unlicensed, unqualified, unpredictable. Said her presence had jeopardized everything. But the only thing Ethan heard was that the only person who made him believe in movement again was gone. He refused treatment that day. Refused food, physical therapy, even refused to let the nurses touch his legs. "She told me healing starts in your mind," he mumbled, "and mine's shutting down." Word spread quickly, among orderlies, among patients, among nurses who didn't have the degrees but had the eyes, the ears, the instincts. Layla had left behind more than a memory. She had left behind proof a boy who could move however slightly after half a year of silence. And even if no one in power would speak it out loud, the staff had begun whispering the one thing the board feared most. What if she was right? That afternoon, a nurse named Melody, 5 years on the job, single mother and never once late, walked into Dr. Kingsley's office with shaking hands and a printed copy of Ethan's latest neurological scan. "I'm not trying to get in trouble," she said. "But you need to see this. His synaptic response rate, it's accelerating. Not gradually, drastically, since the day that girl touched him." Kingsley glanced at the sheet but didn't pick it up. "This hospital doesn't operate on anecdotes," he said coldly. "No, sir," Melody replied. "It operates on politics." He dismissed her without another word, but something in his eyes gave it away. Doubt. Outside the hospital, Layla was back on the south side. Same shelter, same blanket, same pair of shoes, now even more worn than before, but something had changed. Strangers were approaching her on the sidewalk. One woman handed her a new pair of sneakers. Another man, a local preacher, offered her food and a safe place to sleep. "You're the girl from the hospital, right?" they whispered. "The one who made that boy walk." Layla never confirmed it. She didn't need to. The truth had taken on a life of its own. Meanwhile, Ethan had started writing letters. Dozens, hundreds, to local news outlets, to medical journals, to every child in the pediatric wing with a story like his. "Her name is Layla," he wrote, "and I felt my body wake up when she walked into the room." One of those letters made its way to a journalist at the Atlanta Herald, a woman named Cassandra Dyer. She had once been a medical intern, had seen the way young black interns were spoken over, passed up, left behind. She knew that story, knew it in her bones. Within 48 hours, the headline dropped, "The girl who moved the unmovable. A miracle. Southern Hope refuses to name." It spread like fire. The public wanted answers. Who was she? Where did she learn her methods? Why had a hospital with millions in research grants and world-renowned doctors pushed her out? And then gone silent. Dr. Kingsley tried to respond with poise. A controlled press conference, a few lines about safety procedures and patient protection. But nothing lands flat like a lie whispered over the sound of truth crashing in. That night, as the cameras rolled, Ethan stood from his wheelchair during the live broadcast. He didn't wobble. He didn't fall. He stood. Then said 5 words that cracked the hospital's foundation wider than any lawsuit ever could. "She made me believe again. No scripts, no advisors, just a boy in a hospital gown." And the weight of truth behind him. The next morning, 3 board members resigned. A petition with 20,000 signatures demanded Layla's reinstatement not as a patient, not as an experiment, but as a contributor. And somewhere in a bus shelter off Fairmont Avenue, Layla opened a crumpled newspaper and saw her name in ink for the first time in her life. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She closed the paper and started walking back toward the hospital. Because miracles don't knock twice. They walk straight through the front door when no one's watching. The day Layla Freeman returned to Southern Hope, it wasn't in secret. She didn't sneak through the service door. She didn't wait for someone to leave it ajar. She walked up to the front steps, her head held higher than any credential ever issued, her bag slung across her shoulder like a banner no one could confiscate. And she wasn't alone. Behind her stood a crowd, some holding signs, some holding phones, some just holding space. Nurses in plain clothes, medical students, parents of patients who had heard Ethan's words and believed every syllable. Strangers who had seen her name printed in black ink and decided it mattered more than the silence of the men behind the podium. Inside, chaos bloomed. Dr. Kingsley stared at the monitors as live footage of Layla approaching the main entrance flashed across every local network. Board members argued down the hallway. The PR team scrambled to prepare statements. Richard Whitmore stood in his son's room watching his boy's hand curl and uncurl around the edge of the bedsheet stronger than it had ever been. No one could agree on what to do. Security was dispatched to the front lobby. But when they got there, they didn't block the door. They opened it. Not because they were told to, because they had been watching too. And somewhere between Layla's first visit and her forced removal, even the guards had seen what no doctor dared to admit: this girl wasn't a liability, she was a miracle walking on 2 feet. Layla stepped inside. The crowd stayed back. The moment she crossed the lobby, it was silent. Not a hush of fear, not the kind of hush reserved for grief or punishment. It was reverence, the quiet reserved for sacred places and rare truth. Melody, the nurse who once brought her a sandwich, stepped out from behind the nurse's station and smiled. "We've been waiting," she said. Layla nodded. "Is he okay?" "Better than okay. He's been asking for you every hour." Without another word, Layla walked past the front desk, past the shocked interns, past the whispers and narrowed eyes, and pushed open the door to room 207. Ethan sat upright, his legs bent at the knee. He turned at the sound and broke into a grin so wide it cracked something open in every heart that saw it. "You came back," he said. "I told you I would." She moved to his side. No rush, no panic, just presence. Just the steady, undoubting rhythm of someone who had nothing to lose and everything to give. "Close your eyes," she said gently. "Don't think, just feel." Ethan obeyed. She placed her hand, small, calloused, sure, on his thigh. One hand just above the knee, the other pressing lightly against a pressure point his doctors never mentioned. She whispered instructions like prayer, but there was no magic, no hocus-pocus. Only breath and touch and the memory of bodies that wanted to heal, if only someone would believe they could. Then he moved. His leg rose, slowly shaking, uncertain but unmistakably alive. Not an accident. Not a flinch. A step, even if it hadn't yet touched the floor. Outside the room, someone had filmed the moment through the glass panel. It went online within seconds. And by the time Layla lowered Ethan's leg gently back onto the bed, the world had already seen it. That was when Dr. Kingsley stormed in. His face was flushed, his hands trembling not with fear, but rage. The kind of rage only a man of power feels when the order he built begins to fracture. "This is an unauthorized treatment. You were told never to return. You're in violation of state regulation, federal liability clauses, and hospital policy." Layla didn't flinch. But Richard Whitmore stood from his chair at the far corner, stepping into the space between them. "She's in violation of none of those things," he said, "because starting this morning she's here at my request, and under my protection." Kingsley blinked. "You're invoking privilege." "I'm invoking truth," Richard said. "And if your legal team wants to challenge it, they can do it while explaining to the world why you silenced the girl who made my son walk again." The silence was immediate and sharp. Kingsley turned and left. Not another word. That night, Layla sat beside Ethan as he slept. The hospital was still. No reporters, no chants, no monitors beeping. Just breath and stillness. She looked out the window at the city lights flickering across the skyline and whispered to herself, "You didn't win, but you're still here, because sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it returns quietly and refuses to leave." The footage was played on every major network within 24 hours. Ethan Whitmore, son of one of Georgia's most powerful senators, lifting his own leg while a girl with no formal training placed her hands where hundreds of licensed fingers had failed. No machines, no team, no applause, just Layla, quiet, focused, relentless. The nation didn't know what to do with her. Some called her a prodigy. Others called her dangerous. A few tried to turn her into a symbol. But Layla wasn't looking to become anyone's headline or savior. She just wanted Ethan to walk, and more than that, to believe in his body again. Yet the world had already turned her into something more, and when the world does that, it comes with demands. Dr. Kingsley didn't vanish. He retreated, met privately with lawyers, funders, stakeholders. His hands were tied publicly, but behind the scenes he was sharpening knives. He called in specialists from New York and D.C., professionals who carried entire alphabets after their names. He had one goal: prove that whatever progress Ethan made was not because of Layla, but despite her. On the third morning after her return, Layla arrived early. Earlier than the nurses, earlier than the sun. She sat at Ethan's bedside waiting for him to wake. When he did, she was holding his foot in her hands like it was made of glass. "I had a dream," Ethan said, voice groggy. "I was running through our yard. I could smell the dirt. Hold on to that," she said. "We're not far." The session that morning was different. She didn't speak as much. She listened to his breath, to the way his fingers gripped the side rails when she pressed certain points, to the small grunt he let out when his calf spasmed. His body was remembering its map. She was just helping it trace the path. That afternoon, Dr. Kingsley barged into a board meeting with a folder in hand. A confidential neurology report stamped urgent. "I have proof," he said. "The boy's improvements are consistent with known neurological patterns. Spontaneous remission. A rare but documented phenomenon." "Coincidence?" one board member asked. "Precisely. Layla's involvement may be inspiring, but it's anecdotal. We can't build policy on folklore." Richard Whitmore stood up slowly. "This is not folklore," he said. "It's my son, and he's sitting straighter today than he did yesterday. Because of her." "We can't accredit miracles," Kingsley snapped. "The hospital's reputation isn't worth more than my son's truth," Richard interrupted. "And I won't allow you to rewrite it because it came from someone you don't approve of." The room fell silent. Later that evening, Layla was called into the administrative wing. A long mahogany table polished until it reflected the ceiling lights. She stood at one end. On the walls hung portraits of old men in white coats, all staring down like ghosts judging the living. A woman in a navy suit adjusted her glasses. "Ms. Freeman, we've reviewed your presence here. We've assessed the medical outcomes, the legal risks, the optics." Layla said nothing. "We believe it's in everyone's best interest to clarify your role. As of now, you are not a practitioner. You are not a volunteer. You are not staff. What you are is a complication." She stared straight ahead. "And complications," the woman continued, "are best resolved quietly." "What does that mean?" Layla asked. "It means we want you to stop. Step back. Let the professionals finish what you started." Layla looked at each face in the room. "Are you asking me to stop helping him? We're asking you to let him heal within the structure designed to protect him." "Your structure didn't protect him for 6 months," she said. "Watch your tone." "I've watched everything," she said. Her voice firm now. "I've watched you ignore him. I've watched you dismiss me. And I've watched a boy believe in his legs again after everyone else stopped trying. So, no, I won't watch quietly anymore." She turned and walked out. The next morning she was not at the hospital. The staff noticed first, then the nurses, then Ethan. He waited until noon, then 2, then evening. He didn't eat, didn't speak. When his father came to check on him, he said just one thing. "She didn't leave this time. You pushed her out." Richard didn't respond. He sat in the dark room beside his son and said nothing, because somewhere deep down he knew Ethan was right. They called it a miracle. Then they called it a mistake, because it didn't come from someone with a name they could bill. It came from a girl they couldn't control. And control in places like that always cost more than the truth. For 3 days, Layla Freeman vanished. No press, no interviews, no statements. The girl whose touch brought movement back to a paralyzed boy had been silenced again, not by force this time, but by exhaustion. She had walked away not because she lacked courage, but because she had finally understood the system wasn't broken. It was built this way. In room 207, Ethan's eyes stayed fixed on the door. He didn't cry, didn't throw tantrums, But the sparkle, the defiant flicker of belief she had lit inside him, dimmed by the hour. His therapists resumed their routine with professional cheer. They used tools and measurements and charts, but no one looked him in the eye the way she did. No one saw him. They saw a recovery story, a PR opportunity, a case. On the third night, just after midnight, Senator Richard Whitmore walked into the room with a look that no man of power wears comfortably humility. He sat beside his son's bed and placed a small notebook on Ethan's blanket. It was Layla's. He had gone to find her. Not with cameras, not with handlers. Alone. He had found her sitting on the steps of the closed community center where her grandmother used to volunteer. Her shoes worn thin, the laces frayed. She didn't look surprised to see him. "You came to tell me to stop again," she'd asked. "No," he said. "I came to say, I'm sorry." She didn't respond. "I spent my life believing titles made truth," he said. "But then you touched my son, and now he feels things none of us could explain. And I didn't thank you." "You don't owe me that," she replied. "Yes, I do. And more than that, I owe you the right to finish what you started. Publicly, with honor." She had handed him the notebook and said nothing more. Not yes, not no. Just silence. That was her answer. In the days that followed, something strange began to shift. A senior nurse quit publicly and shared in an op-ed how she had witnessed the hospital deny a young black girl the dignity of acknowledgement because she didn't fit the mold. More followed. A few young doctors released anonymous letters in support of Layla's intuition and her accuracy, one even admitting he'd copied notes from the margins of her worn books after she left them behind. And then came the moment no one could stop. The Whitmore family held a press conference not in front of the hospital but on the sidewalk where Layla used to sleep. Richard Whitmore stood at the microphone, not as a senator, but as a father. "My son walked. Because of her," he said. "The institution didn't want her. But healing isn't loyal to institutions. It listens to intention. And Layla Freeman's intention was pure." He held up her notebook. "Her methods may not fit into our textbooks, but sometimes what saves us comes from beyond what we're trained to trust. If we don't make space for that, then all our degrees and diplomas are worth less than her courage." There was no applause, only silence. The kind that happens when the truth settles into the bones of a crowd. The hospital's board issued a statement days later. Not an apology too polished for that, but an acknowledgement. They announced the formation of a new integrative healing program and named it the Freeman Initiative. It wasn't what she asked for, but it was a start. Ethan did walk again. Fully. Not because of machines or a new surgery, but because someone believed he could before the scans said so. And as for Layla, she never returned to the hospital, but her name remained, not on the wall, not on a badge, on the breath of every patient who whispered, "Maybe I'm not broken. Maybe they just never saw me." She never asked for credit, never asked for reward. But she gave something that the world too often forgets to value: presence without pride, healing without hierarchy, love without license. And that is why her story mattered. Not because she defied science, but because she reminded us of something older than science itself. That truth can come from anywhere. That healing is not about who gets paid to care, but who shows up anyway. And that sometimes the least likely person is the one who carries the miracle in their hands. For an audience who's lived long enough to see power-abused systems fail and stories erased, remember this one. Because Layla Freeman was never supposed to matter. And yet, she did.